The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Blackstone penthouse, sending crystal fragments dancing across the room like fallen stars. Isabella Chen stood frozen in the doorway, her wedding dress still pristine white, watching. Her new husband's shoulders shake with rage as he gripped the edge of his mahogany desk. "You think this is a game?" Alexander Blackstone's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. He didn't turn around, but she could see his reflection. In the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan's glittering skyline. "You think you can waltz into my life and play the innocent victim?" Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. 6 hours ago, she'd walked down the aisle of St. Patrick's Cathedral. Cameras flashing, society's elite watching her every move. The wedding had been a performance, choreographed down to the second, but this moment felt devastatingly real. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the city's distant hum. Alexander spun around, his gray eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. His black tuxedo was rumpled now, the bow tie hanging loose around his neck. For the first time since she'd met him 3 weeks ago, he looked human, vulnerable, dangerous. "Don't." He stalked toward her, each step deliberate. "Don't lie to me. Not tonight." The scent of his cologne mixed with whiskey hit her as he stopped inches away. She could see the golden flecks in his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. Her body betrayed her, responding to his proximity despite the fury radiating from him. "The contract was clear," she said, lifting her chin. 1 year, no emotional attachments. "I've done nothing wrong." His laugh was bitter. "Nothing wrong? You call seducing my business partner's son nothing wrong?" Isabella's blood turned to ice. "What?" "James Morrison." Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his shouting. 22 years old. Harvard graduate. Ring any bells? The name hit her like a physical blow. Name's the sweet young man who'd approached her at the engagement party last week, who'd asked for her number with boyish charm, who'd texted her innocent messages about books and coffee. "He's just a friend," she breathed. "A friend." Alexander's eyes glittered dangerously. "A friend whose father controls 40% of Morrison Industries? Friend whose family could destroy my merger with a single phone call?" He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "A friend who's been telling everyone at his country club how he's going to steal Alexander Blackstone's wife." The words hung in the air between them like poison. Isabella's mind raced, trying to process the implications. She'd been so naive, so desperate for genuine human connection in this cold, calculated world she'd been thrust into. "I didn't know," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Swear I didn't know who he was. Didn't you?" Alexander's. Fingers traced the curve of her jaw, the touch gentle despite his harsh words. "Or did someone tell you exactly who to target?" The accusation hit her like a slap. "You think I'm working with someone against you?" "I think," Alexander said, his thumb brushing across her lower lip, "that you're either the most innocent woman in New York or the most dangerous." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding toward the door with predatory grace. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the handle. "The Morrison deal closes in 3 days," he said without turning around. "If it falls through because of your friendship, our arrangement ends immediately." And Isabella. His gray eyes found hers in the window's reflection. "You'll owe me far more than money." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Isabella alone in the vast penthouse. The city lights blurred through her tears as the magnitude of her situation crashed over her. She wasn't just trapped in a loveless marriage. She was caught in a web of corporate espionage and family secrets she didn't understand. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Well done, little bird. Phase 1 complete. Time for Phase 2. Isabella's blood ran cold. Someone was playing a game she didn't even know existed. And somehow, she'd become the most important piece on the board. The Blackstone Industries boardroom felt like a tomb. Isabella sat in the corner, Alexander's wife in name only, watching 30 of Manhattan's most powerful executives debate her husband's fate. The Morrison deal hung by a thread, and she was. The reason why? The leak came from inside. Harrison Webb, Alexander's business partner, announced grimly. His steel-gray hair caught the morning light streaming through the windows. Someone gave Morrison Industries our acquisition strategy. 24 hours before the meeting, Isabella's stomach clenched. Round the polished table, faces turned toward her with varying degrees of suspicion. She'd attended exactly 3 board meetings since her marriage, and already she was a pariah. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. He hadn't looked at her once since she'd entered the room. The distance between them felt like an ocean, even though only 15 feet separated their chairs. Perhaps Victoria Ashford spoke up, her voice dripping. With venom, we should discuss how convenient it is that this leak coincided with certain personal entanglements. Her icy blue eyes fixed on Isabella. New marriages can be so complicated. That's enough. Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a blade. For a moment, Isabella's heart lifted. Then she saw his expression. He wasn't defending her. It was protecting his own reputation. Harrison leaned forward. Alex, we need to consider all possibilities. Your wife has been in contact with James Morrison. I'm aware, Alexander replied coolly. The situation is being handled. Like she was a problem to be solved, rather than a person caught in circumstances beyond her control. Isabella's chest tightened with a mixture of hurt and anger. I never gave James any information about the company, she said, her voice stronger. Then she felt. I don't even know what information you're talking about. Victoria's laugh was like ice cracking, wonderfully convenient. The innocent bride routine is charming, dear, but we're not fools. Isabella stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. If you have something to say to me, say it directly. The room fell silent. Even Alexander looked surprised by her boldness. Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious delight. Very well, I'll be direct. Victoria rose slowly, her red dress like a splash of blood against the room's muted tones. 3 weeks ago, you were nobody, a girl drowning in debt with no prospects. Now you're married to one of the most powerful men in the city. Tell me, what did you have to promise to secure such an advantageous arrangement? The implication hung in the air like smoke. Isabella felt heat flood her cheeks, but she held Victoria's gaze. I promised to honor my father's debts, she said quietly. Nothing more. How noble. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. And James Morrison, what did you promise him? I promised him nothing because he's a stranger who asked me about books. Isabella's voice grew stronger with each word. That threatens your precious deal. Perhaps you should examine your own insecurities instead of mine. Followed was deafening. Victoria's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. The meeting is over, he announced, standing. We'll reconvene when I have more information. The executives filed out in uncomfortable silence, Victoria shooting Isabella a look that promised retribution. When the room was empty except for husband and wife, Alexander finally turned to face her. That was unwise, he said. What was unwise was letting them attack me while you sat there like a statue. Isabella's composure cracked. I'm not your enemy, Alexander. Aren't you? He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the empty room. Then explain this. He slid his phone across the table. On the screen was a photo that made Isabella's blood freeze. Her, sitting in a cafe with James Morrison, leaning across the table as he showed her something on his laptop. The angle made it look intimate, conspiratorial. Where did you get this? She whispered. It doesn't matter where. What matters is what Morrison was showing you. Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. Financial projections, Isabella. Blackstone. Industries quarterly reports. Documents that should be locked in my private safe. Isabella stared at the photo, her mind racing. She remembered the moment clearly. James had been showing her pictures from his recent trip to Paris, excited to share his love of architecture with someone who seemed interested. But in the photo, the laptop screen was turned away from the camera. It could have been anything. He was showing me travel photos, she said desperately. Nothing else. Travel photos. Alexander's tone was flat, disbelieving, yes. He was excited about the Musée d'Orsay and wanted to show someone who might appreciate art. Isabella's voice broke. I swear to you, that's all it was. Alexander. studied her face for a long moment. In his eyes, she saw something flicker, doubt warring with suspicion. Then his expression hardened again. Even if that's true, he said, the damage is done. Morrison Industries pulled out of the merger an hour ago. Isabella felt the world tilt beneath her feet. No. $3 billion, Isabella. Gone. Alexander's words fell like hammer blows, along with the trust of every person in that room. This isn't my fault. But even as she said it, Isabella knew it didn't matter. Fault was irrelevant when empires were crumbling. Alexander moved to the window, his silhouette stark against the Manhattan skyline. The board is calling for an emergency vote tomorrow. They want you gone. And you? Isabella's voice was barely a whisper.
What do you want?
He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. But when he finally spoke, his words shattered. What remained of her hope? I want the truth. And I want to know who's really pulling your strings. Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. Beautiful work. The king is isolated from his queen. Now comes the checkmate. Isabella's hands shook as she read the words. Someone was orchestrating her destruction, manipulating her every move. But who and why? Looking at Alexander's rigid shoulders, she realized with growing horror that she might never get the chance to find out. Tomorrow's vote would end there. Marriage, destroy her chance at freedom, and leave her with nothing but questions and the growing certainty that she'd been a pawn from the very beginning. The rain pounded against the windows of Isabella's childhood apartment in Queens, each drop like a bullet against glass. She'd fled the penthouse after finding Alexander's private investigator's report on her kitchen counter. 47 pages, detailing every aspect of her life, from her college grades to her coffee preferences. The clinical dissection of her existence had left her feeling raw and exposed. Now, she sat on her father's old couch, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the ghosts of happier times. Scrolling through the anonymous messages that had been haunting her phone for days, your adoptive mother sends her regards. She's quite proud. Of how well you're playing your part? Did you really think the Morrison boy found you by accident? Phase 3 begins tonight. Don't disappoint us. Each message felt like a noose tightening around her neck. Someone had orchestrated her entire relationship with James Morrison, manipulated her into a position where she'd look guilty regardless of her innocence. But who had that kind of power? That level of access to her life? A soft knock at the door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a figure in an expensive coat, face obscured by shadow. Her heart hammered as she recognized the silhouette, Alexander. She opened the door to find her husband standing in the hallway, rain dripping from his dark hair. He looked different here, smaller somehow, stripped of the commanding presence that defined him in his glass tower. His gray eyes swept over her. Modest apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture and cracked plaster walls. This is where you grew up, he said. Not a question. Isabella stepped aside to let him enter, acutely aware of how her simple jeans and sweater must look compared to his tailored suit. My father and I moved here when I was 16. Alexander moved through the small space like he was cataloging evidence. His fingers traced the spine of a worn poetry book on her coffee table, lingered on a framed photo of her and Henry Chen at her college graduation. He wasn't your biological father, Alexander said quietly. No. Isabella watched him, examined the photo. But he was the only father I ever knew. The only person who ever saw me as something more than a burden? Is that what you think you are? A burden? The unexpected gentleness in his voice caught her off guard. Isn't that what I've become to you? Alexander set down the photo and turned to face her. In the apartment's dim lighting, she could see exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. The board voted tonight. Isabella's stomach dropped and they want you gone. Effective immediately. He paused. I overruled them. What? Isabella stared at him in shock. Why? Because I found something interesting in Morrison's phone. Records. Alexander pulled out his phone, showing her a screen full of call logs. 17 calls to Victoria Ashford in the past month. It's all lasting longer than 30 minutes. Isabella's mind raced. Victoria, but she hates me. She hates the idea of me being married. Period. Alexander's jaw tightened. Victoria and I were engaged 5 years ago. She expected our relationship to resume once I needed a wife for the inheritance clause. The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow. You were engaged to her. It was another business arrangement. Until I realized she was feeding information to my competitors. Alexander's voice turned bitter. I called off the engagement, but Victoria never accepted it was over. Isabella sank onto the couch, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Morrison meeting, the photos even James Morrison himself. Alexander sat beside her, careful to maintain distance. He's been Victoria's puppet for months. She convinced his father that destabilizing Blackstone Industries would benefit Morrison's portfolio. So I really was innocent. Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in it. Not that it matters now. The damage is done. Maybe not. Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. I have a proposition. Isabella eyed the folder warily. Another contract? An alliance. Alexander's gray eyes met hers. Victoria made one mistake. She underestimated both of us. Isabella opened the folder to find financial documents, corporate structures, and what looked like a hostile takeover plan. Her breath caught as she recognized some of the company names. You want to destroy her? She said. I want justice. Victoria orchestrated an attack on my company, manipulated an innocent woman, and nearly cost me everything I've built. Alexander's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. She chose war. I'm simply giving her one. Isabella studied the documents, her mind working through the implications. This would ruin her family's company. Yes. And you need me because you're still legally my wife? And because Victoria's next move will be to discredit our marriage entirely? She'd claim fraud, coercion, anything to invalidate the inheritance clause. Alexander leaned forward. But if we present a united front, if we show the world that our marriage is real, is it? The question escaped before Isabella could. Stop it, real. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows. In the silence, Isabella became acutely aware of his presence. The way his cologne mixed with the familiar sense of her childhood home. I don't know, he said finally. But I know that watching you stand up to Victoria in that boardroom was the first time in years I felt proud of someone. Isabella's heart skipped. Alexander, ... And I know that the thought of Victoria destroying you makes me want to burn the world down. His voice dropped to a whisper. So maybe it's more real than either of us planned? Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed with another message. This time, the words made her blood freeze. How touching, the king and queen together at last. Fortunately, the game ends tonight. Check your father's safety deposit box. The key is where he always kept it. Isabella's hands shook as she showed Alexander the message. His expression darkened as he read, Your father had a safety deposit box? I thought I'd found everything when he died. Isabella's voice was barely audible. But he always kept important documents in his bedroom desk, behind the photo of my mother. They moved to the small bedroom that had remained untouched since Henry's death. Isabella's fingers trembled as she reached behind the framed photo of a woman she'd never known. Her biological mother, who'd died when Isabella was 3, leaving her to drift through foster care until Henry found her. The key was exactly where it always had been, taped to the back of the frame. But with it was something Isabella had never seen before. A letter, sealed and yellowed with age, addressed in Henry's careful handwriting. For Isabella, when the truth can no longer be hidden? Alexander watched as she broke the seal with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Henry's familiar script. As Isabella read, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth about your birth, your mother, and the debt I could never repay. Your mother was Victoria Ashford's sister, the sister she killed. Isabella's vision blurred. The letter continued, detailing a car accident that wasn't an accident. A cover-up that had buried the truth for 24 years, and a debt of silence that had cost Henry everything. "Doria's my aunt," Isabella whispered. "And she's been planning this from the beginning." Alexander took the letter, his face grim as he read, "She didn't just want to destroy our marriage, she wanted to destroy you. To finish what she started when you were 3 years old." Isabella felt the walls closing in. Everything she'd believed about her life, her father, her place in the world, had been a lie. But in the midst of her shattered reality, one truth remained clear. "She's not going to win," Isabella said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Not this time." Alexander's phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the tension. He answered with a sharp Blackstone. Isabella watched his face change as he listened, going from stone to something approaching fear. When he asked, "Then how long do we have?" he hung up and turned to Isabella, his eyes dark with urgency. "Called an emergency shareholder meeting for tomorrow morning. She's claiming our marriage is fraudulent and demanding my immediate removal as CEO." Alexander grabbed Isabella's hands. "She's also filed a police report, claiming you've been embezzling money from various charities through a fake account in your name." Isabella's world spun. "That's impossible. The account exists. $10 million has been moving through it for months." Alexander's grip tightened. "Someone's been building a case against you for a very long time." The final piece of Victoria's game snapped into place. Destroy Isabella's credibility, invalidate the marriage, and seize control of Blackstone Industries. It was elegant, ruthless, and nearly foolproof. Nearly. "The safety deposit box?" Isabella said suddenly. "We need to see what my father left." They prepared to leave for the bank. Isabella's phone buzzed one final time. "Checkmate, little bird, your king can't save you now." But Victoria Ashford had made one crucial error. She'd assumed that Isabella would break under pressure, that 24 years of manipulation and control would leave her helpless when the final blow came. She had no idea that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one with nothing left to lose. The safety deposit box sat open between them like Pandora's box, its contents scattered across the bank's private viewing room table. Isabella stared at the evidence of her father's secret life, her hands trembling as she processed the magnitude of what they'd found: photographs of a car accident scene, police reports with pages missing, bank records showing regular payments from an offshore account. At the bottom, a thick manila envelope marked insurance policy. "Your father was blackmailing Victoria," Alexander said quietly, his voice filled with something between admiration and horror. Isabella picked up one of the photographs. Her mother's car, wrapped around a tree on a rainy night 24 years ago. But the damage was wrong. The impact was on the passenger side, not the driver's side. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was part of another vehicle's bumper. "She ran my mother off the road," Isabella whispered. "Victoria killed her own sister." Alexander examined the police report, and someone covered it up. "Look at the signature." He pointed to the bottom of the page. "Detective Morrison, James's uncle." The web of corruption and murder stretched back decades, connecting families and fortunes in ways that made Isabella's head spin. Her father hadn't just been protecting her. He'd been gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. "There's more," Alexander said, pulling documents from the envelope. "Medical records. Victoria was pregnant at the time of the accident. She lost the baby in the crash." Isabella's heart clenched with unexpected sympathy. "So she blamed my mother. When your mother died, she blamed you." Alexander's jaw tightened. A 3-year-old child became the focus of her grief and rage. Isabella understood now why Victoria's hatred had felt so personal, so consuming. She wasn't just an obstacle to Victoria's plans. She was a living reminder of the sister Victoria had murdered and the child she'd lost. "We have to go," Alexander said suddenly, checking his watch. "The shareholder meeting starts in an hour." They arrived at Blackstone Industries to find reporters crowding the building's entrance, cameras flashing as they pushed through the throng. Victoria had orchestrated a media circus, ensuring that Isabella's alleged crimes would be front-page news regardless of the meeting's outcome. In the elevator, Isabella caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. She'd chosen her outfit carefully this morning. A navy suit that projected confidence while remaining appropriately conservative. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her makeup minimal but flawless. She looked like a woman ready for war. "Ah! You sure about this?" Alexander asked as they reached the executive floor. Isabella thought about her father, about the evidence they'd found, about the 24 years of lies that had shaped her life. "I've never been more sure of anything." The boardroom was packed beyond capacity. Victoria sat at the far end of the table, resplendent in a crimson suit that made her look like an avenging angel. Her smile was triumphant as Isabella entered, the expression of a predator who'd finally cornered her prey. Harrison Webb called the meeting to order, his face grim. "We're here to address serious allegations regarding fraudulent marriage contracts and financial impropriety. Mrs. Blackstone, you've been accused of establishing illegal offshore accounts and embezzling funds from multiple charitable organizations." Isabella stood, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. "I'd like to address those allegations directly." Victoria's smile widened. How refreshing. The accused wishes to confess. "Not confess," Isabella said calmly. "Expose." She nodded to Alexander, who activated the room's presentation system. The first document appeared on the massive screen behind Isabella, a bank record showing the fraudulent account Victoria had created in her name. "This account was opened 3 years ago," Isabella said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Long before I met my husband. Long before I even knew the Blackstone name." She clicked to the next slide. "The signature on the account opening documents is a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria's smile flickered for the first time. "Furthermore," Isabella continued, "the IP address used to access this account traces back to a computer registered to Ashford Industries, specifically to Victoria Ashford's personal laptop." The murmurs grew louder. Victoria stood abruptly, her composure cracking. "This is absurd. You have no proof of any connection between me and that account, don't I?" Isabella clicked to the next slide, revealing a photograph that made Victoria's face go white. "This is security footage from the bank, timestamped 6 months ago. That's you, Victoria, making a deposit to the account you created in my name." The room erupted in shocked voices. Victoria's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook him off, her attention fixed on Isabella with laser intensity. "Even if that's true," Victoria said, her voice strained, "it doesn't explain your relationship with James Morrison. It doesn't explain the leaked documents." "You're right," Isabella agreed. "It doesn't, but this does." The next slide showed phone records, call logs, and text messages, all between Victoria and James Morrison, all proving their conspiracy to entrap Isabella and destroy the merger deal. "James Morrison was your weapon," Isabella said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You used him to get close to me, to create the appearance of impropriety. You orchestrated our meetings, coached him on what to say, even provided him with fake documents to show me so the photographs would look incriminating." Victoria's composure finally shattered. "You little bitch. You think you can waltz in here and destroy me with parlor tricks and manufactured evidence?" "I think," Isabella said quietly, "that I can destroy you with the truth." She clicked to the final slide, and the room fell dead silent. It was a photograph from 24 years ago, showing 2 cars at the scene of a fatal accident. One car wrapped around a tree, the other barely visible in the shadows, bearing the distinctive grille of a vintage Ashford Industries Company vehicle. "This is the scene of my mother's death," Isabella said, her voice breaking slightly. "The accident that made me an orphan. At age 3? Except it wasn't an accident. Was it, Victoria?" Victoria's face had gone ashen. Around the table, board members stared in horror as the implications sank in. "You ran your own sister off the road," Isabella continued. "You killed her in a fit of rage, then used your family's connections to cover it up. My adoptive father knew the truth. He spent 24 years collecting evidence, protecting me from you." "That's impossible," Victoria whispered. "Henry Chen was nobody, a weak man who couldn't even protect his own daughter." "He was the strongest man I ever knew," Isabella said fiercely. And he made sure that when this day came, when you finally tried to finish what you started, I'd have everything I needed to stop you. Alexander stood, moving to Isabella's side. The evidence we've presented today will be turned over to both the police and the SEC. Victoria Ashford will face charges for fraud, conspiracy, and murder. Victoria looked wildly around the room, seeking support, finding only horrified faces and accusing stares. Her empire, built on decades of careful manipulation and buried secrets, was crumbling around her. "You think you've won?" Victoria snarled, her mask finally falling away to reveal the monster beneath. "You think this changes anything? I'll destroy you both. I'll burn everything down before I let you have it." "No," Isabella said simply. "You won't." Security guards entered the room, moving toward Victoria with professional efficiency. As they approached, she made one last desperate play. "Alexander," she called out, her voice breaking. "You loved me once?" Before this charade. "You loved me. That has to count for something." Alexander looked at Victoria for a long moment, and Isabella saw something flicker in his eyes. Not love, but the ghost of what might have been, the memory of a man who'd once trusted her completely. "It does count for something," he said quietly. "It counts as the biggest mistake I ever made. Till I met Isabella, I thought that meant I was broken, incapable of real love. But she showed me the difference between obsession and devotion, between possession and partnership." He turned to Isabella, his gray eyes soft with an emotion that made her heart race. "She showed me what it means to choose someone every day, not because you need them, but because you want to build something beautiful together." As the security guards led Victoria away, her final words echoed through the boardroom. "This isn't over, Isabella. Blood always tells. You're more like me than you know." The threat sent ice through Isabella's veins, but Alexander's hand found hers, warm and steady and real. Whatever Victoria had planned next, whatever final card she had left to play, Isabella wouldn't face it alone. The boardroom slowly emptied, leaving husband and wife alone with the wreckage of their victory. They'd exposed Victoria's crimes, cleared Isabella's name, and saved Blackstone Industries. But Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only won the first battle in a war that was far from over. "What happens now?" she asked, Alexander's thumb traced over her wedding ring. A simple band that had started as a symbol of convenience and had somehow become something more. "Now we go home," he said, "and we figure out if this marriage is still just a contract, or if it's something worth fighting for." But as they left the building, neither of them saw the figure watching from across the street. Victoria Ashford might be in custody, but her network of allies and enemies was vast and far-reaching. Some secrets, once unleashed, had a way of growing into monsters all their own. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the same spot where their story had begun, looking out at Manhattan from the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander's penthouse. But everything had changed. The city lights no longer felt cold and distant. Were warm, welcoming, full of possibility behind her. She could hear Alexander moving through their home, making coffee in the kitchen they'd learned to share. The space that had once felt like a museum now bore the marks of their life together. Books scattered on tables, photographs from their honeymoon in Tuscany, a half-finished puzzle they'd started on a rainy Sunday and still hadn't completed. "Your lawyer called," Alexander said, joining her at the window with 2 steaming mugs. "Victoria's plea hearing is next week." Isabella accepted the coffee, inhaling the rich aroma. Life without parole. It's what she deserves. And James Morrison, 5 years for conspiracy and fraud. His father's cooperating fully with the SEC investigation. Isabella took a sip, savoring the warmth. "Sometimes I almost feel sorry for James. Victoria manipulated him just like she manipulated everyone else." "Almost," Alexander agreed, his arm sliding around her waist. The casual intimacy still surprised her sometimes. The way they'd learned to exist in each other's space without contracts or conditions. Their marriage had evolved slowly, carefully, like 2 wounded animals learning to trust. There had been setbacks, moments when old fears surfaced and threatened to pull them apart. But they'd fought for it, for each other, for the possibility of something real emerging from the ashes of deception. The board wants to throw a party, Alexander said, to celebrate the merger going through. Morrison Industries is officially part of Blackstone now. Isabella smiled. A party where I won't be accused of corporate espionage? How refreshing. Harrison suggested we could announce something else at the party. Alexander's voice grew softer. If you're ready. Isabella turned in his arms, studying his face. They'd been talking about it for weeks, the possibility of making their marriage real in every sense, not just legally or emotionally, but publicly. A true partnership built on choice rather than necessity. Are you ready? She asked. Alexander's gray eyes held hers, and she saw the vulnerability he still struggled to show, even to her. I've been ready since the night you stood up to Victoria in that boardroom, he said. Since I realized that somewhere between protecting you and fighting beside you, I'd fallen completely in love with my wife. The words hung between them like a bridge, spanning the distance they'd traveled from strangers to allies to something deeper. Isabella reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. I love you too, she whispered. Not the contract, not the security, not the life you gave me, the man who reads poetry when he thinks I'm asleep, who makes terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings and pretends they're edible, who sees me as more than just a debt to be paid, or a problem to be solved. Alexander's kiss was soft, reverent, full of promises they were finally ready to make. When they broke apart, Isabella could see the future stretching before them, uncertain, but no longer frightening. There's something else, Alexander said, his voice slightly nervous. I had the lawyers draw up new papers. Isabella's heart skipped. New papers? I reached into his jacket and pulled out a legal document, but this one looked different from the cold contract that had bound them together a year ago. This one was tied with a blue ribbon, handwritten in places, personal in a way that made Isabella's chest tight with emotion. Real marriage contract, Alexander said. Not about debts, or inheritances, or business arrangements. About partnership. About building something together because we choose to, not because we have to. Isabella's hands shook as she took the document. The first page was covered in Alexander's careful handwriting, not legal jargon, but personal vows, promises about supporting each other's dreams, about facing whatever came next as a team. There's no expiration date, she noticed, her voice thick with emotion. There's a renewal clause instead, Alexander said with a small smile. Every year we choose each other again. Every year we decide if this is still what we want. Isabella looked up at him, this man who'd started as a stranger and become her anchor, her partner, her home. And if 1 year we don't want to renew, then we'll have had however many beautiful years we were meant to have. Alexander's thumb brushed away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. But I'm hoping that won't be an issue for a very long time, Isabella laughed through her tears. You're assuming I can put up with your terrible pancakes for decades? I'm counting on it. They signed the new contract together, their signatures intertwining on the page like their lives had intertwined in reality. No witnesses except the city lights and the promise of tomorrow stretching before them. A month later, Isabella stood in a different place entirely. The small bookstore in Greenwich Village was everything she'd dreamed of as a girl, with floor-to-ceiling shelves, cozy reading nooks, and the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. Above the door, a simple sign read Chen and Blackstone Books. Stories for every heart. Duh. The nonprofit literacy program launches next month, her assistant, Maria, reported. Flipping through a thick folder, we've got partnerships with 12 schools and funding for at least 50 scholarships. Isabella nodded, her attention split between the business plans and the man across the street. Alexander stood outside his newest acquisition, a small community center that would house after-school programs and job training initiatives. He caught her watching and waved, his smile visible even from a distance. They'd learned to build something together that was bigger than either of them alone. Blackstone Industries was more profitable than ever, but it was also more conscious, more connected to the communities it served. Isabella's foundation provided education and opportunities for underprivileged children, while Alexander's business acumen ensured they could sustain their impact for generations. Mrs. Blackstone? Maria's voice pulled Isabella back to the present. There's someone here to see you. Isabella looked up to find a young woman standing nervously by the door, probably 19 or 20, with dark hair and familiar green eyes. She clutched a worn paperback book against her chest like a shield.
Right.
"I'm sorry to bother you," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Sarah Morrison. James Morrison is my brother." Isabella's blood chilled, but she kept her expression neutral. "What can I do for you, Sarah?" "I wanted to apologize," Sarah said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "For what he did, what my family did. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know that not all of us agreed with it." Isabella studied the girl's face, seeing genuine remorse and something else. "Fear. Not responsible for your brother's choices," Isabella said gently. "Or your father's. But I am responsible. For mine." Sarah held out the book she'd been clutching. "This is why I'm really here." Isabella took the book, recognizing it as a copy of Jane Eyre, well-read and obviously beloved. But tucked inside the pages was something that made her hand shake. A letter written in Victoria Ashford's distinctive handwriting. "She contacted me 2 weeks ago," Sarah whispered, "from prison. She knows things about my family, about what really happened with the merger. She's threatening to expose everything unless I help her." Isabella's mind raced. Victoria was supposed to be in solitary confinement, cut off from the outside world. How was she still pulling strings? "What does she want you to do?" Isabella asked. Sarah's answer made Isabella's blood freeze. "She wants me to get close to you, to become your friend, your protege. She has a plan to destroy everything you've built, but she needs someone you trust to do it." Isabella felt the familiar chill of manipulation, the sense of being a pawn in someone else's game. But this time was different. This time she wasn't alone. "Sarah," Isabella said carefully, "why are you telling me this instead of doing what?" she asked. The girl's chin lifted with a courage that reminded Isabella of herself a year ago. "Because I've read about what you overcame, what you built from nothing. And I decided I'd rather be like you than like the people who tried to destroy you." Isabella looked at this scared, brave young woman and saw possibility instead of threat, an ally instead of an enemy, perhaps even a daughter of the heart, the way Henry Chen had taken in a lost little girl decades ago. "Then let's give Victoria exactly what she wants," Isabella said, with a smile that would have terrified her enemies. "Let's give her a spy, just not the kind she's expecting." 6 months later, Isabella and Alexander stood together in the courtroom as Victoria Ashford faced additional charges based on evidence. Sarah Morrison had helped them gather witness tampering, conspiracy from prison, and a dozen other crimes that would ensure she never saw freedom again. As the judge read the final sentence, Victoria's eyes found Isabella's across the crowded courtroom. For a moment, the masks slipped, and Isabella saw not a monster, but a broken woman who had let grief and rage consume everything good in her life. "Hope someday you find peace," Isabella whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. Victoria's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise, or gratitude, or regret. Then the guards led her away, and Isabella felt a weight she'd carried for over a year finally lift from her shoulders. Outside the courthouse, Alexander took her hand as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. They'd learned to navigate the public scrutiny together, to protect their private moments, while remaining open about their journey. "No regrets?" Alexander asked, as they walked toward their car. Isabella thought about the question seriously, the way she'd learned to think. About everything that mattered. A year ago, she'd been a frightened girl drowning in debt, manipulated by forces she didn't understand. Now she was a woman who owned her choices, her mistakes, her victories. "Only one," she said. Alexander's eyebrows rose. "What's that? Regret?" "That it took Victoria's schemes to bring us together. I wish we could have found each other under better circumstances." Alexander stopped walking, pulling her into his arms despite the photographers and the crowds. "Isabella Chen Blackstone," he said, his voice full of the wonder that still caught him sometimes when he looked at her. "I would have found you eventually. In this life or another, in better circumstances or worse. Some things are just meant to be." He kissed her then, in front of the courthouse where they'd just buried their past, under the wide sky that held their future. Around them, the city hummed with life and possibility, with stories yet to be written and dreams yet to be fulfilled. Later that night, the quiet of their home, Isabella found Alexander reading in his study. She curled up in the chair beside him, watching the way the lamplight caught the silver threads that had appeared in his dark hair over the past year. "What are you reading?" she asked. He held up the book so she could see the cover. "Jane Eyre. Sarah recommended it." Isabella laughed, remembering the scared girl who had become like a younger sister to them both, who was now attending Columbia on a scholarship from Isabella's foundation. Good choice. It's about a woman who refuses to compromise her integrity. "For security?" "Sounds familiar," Alexander said with a smile. Isabella moved to the arm of his chair, letting him pull her into his lap. "What's your favorite part?" Alexander found the passage he'd bookmarked and read aloud. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will." "That's beautiful," Isabella said softly. "It reminded me of you. Of the woman who walked into that boardroom and took down Victoria Ashford with nothing but the truth and her own courage." Isabella kissed his temple, breathing in the scent that had become home to her. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified." "What made it brave?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle beyond their windows. In the distance, Isabella could see the community center, where dozens of children were learning to read through their literacy program. Closer, the lights of the bookstore where tomorrow she'd host another workshop for aspiring writers. "Do you think we'll always be this happy?" Isabella asked. Alexander's arms tightened around her. "I think we'll have happy days and hard days like everyone else. But I think we'll face them together. And I think that's better than being happy alone." Isabella tilted her head back to look at him. "Is that your idea of romance? Practical optimism?" "That's my idea of love," Alexander said seriously. "Choosing each other when it's easy and when it's hard. Building something that can weather storms because it's built on truth instead of illusion." Isabella thought about all the storms they'd already weathered, all the ways they'd learned to trust and support and challenge each other. She thought about the scared girl who'd signed a contract in desperation and the cold man who'd needed a wife for business purposes. Neither of those people existed anymore. In their place were a woman who knew her worth and a man who'd learned that vulnerability was strength, it's not weakness. A partnership built on choice and sustained by daily acts of love. "I choose you," Isabella said, the words they'd started saying to each other every morning. Every night, every time doubt crept in. "I choose you too," Alexander replied, sealing the promise with a kiss. Outside, the city slept and dreamed, full of stories yet to be told.
Ow.
But inside their home, Isabella and Alexander had found their ending. The one that was really a beginning. The one that promised tomorrow and tomorrow. And tomorrow, each day, a choice to love and be loved in return. The end.